Hi friends, welcome back to my studio. This is Kate and I have been working on a couple of projects and I wanted to show you some of them and then also show you how to do one of these that is just such an easy little project to do in the evening or whenever you have a few minutes to stitch. So I'm going to start off with one that I just had so much fun with. It is a scrappy little flower collage. I have this piece of fabric. I haven't pressed it yet, but I just had this piece of fabric and I just started with this flower. What I did was I cut circles out of different colors, different fabrics, all in an orange and yellow. Okay, so I cut this out and then I cut this out. And then I just used a running stitch all around. I'll let you look at that a little bit up close. This was so much fun to do. And I just layered the fabrics and I offset some of them to give it this kind of, it kind of feels like a cabbage rose to me, but just this general flower, okay? So I put that one there and then I decided I wanted to do another flower in a cool color. Okay, so we've got the warm colors and the cool colors. So I went ahead and made this one in purples, and these are kind of batik fabrics, which gave them an incredibly interesting look. And again, I just cut a little circle, a bigger circle, a bigger circle, and they're not exactly circles, you know, they're just kind of wonky, and then I put them in. I had so much fun making these. So first I just placed these two flowers. Then I chain stitched a stem that went kind of around to what I wanted. And then I laid in some of the similar fabric. They're batik, but in greens. But I did bring in some of the purples and blues because there was just something about that really fit this project. And then last thing was I went ahead and chain stitched a stem for this flower. And I just wanted it to kind of sit here. And my thought was, you know, we always want threes of things in our projects. So obviously we've got two flowers, but then I wanted kind of a cluster of leaves to be the third element in this. They're in a bit of a line. If I looked at it sideways, it would kind of have a movement to it. So I like it, you know, like that. And then I did add in some flowers, but they're not as strong color, are these leaves. So they're kind of blending in with the chain stitch. So that was one project. And again, I just used scraps in two different colors and then a third color for the leaves. So that's an idea that you might enjoy doing. One other thought was that I put a piece of fleece on the back. It's kind of a thin, not exactly like wadding, more of, I don't know what it is exactly. It might be a fusible fleece, but I don't think it is. I think it's just a tiny thin piece of fleece. But that enabled this to not bunch up where I was stitching. I highly recommend that if you're doing layers like this on a thin piece of fabric, because it really kept everything in place. So I only did it under the two flowers. Then everything else I just stitched right on. You can see it kind of puckered. And I could have put the fleece on the whole thing. That would have worked. But I think once I iron it and stretch it out a little bit, it's going to be fine. Okay, so that was one project. Then in the vein of scrappiness, I made a little bird with some bunting. He's like on a clothesline. I just thought that would be cute. I have a Pinterest board full of birds and I have made my own birds so many times. So this shape, you know, it's just a little head, kind of comes straight across here into a tail. And then you cut a couple of wings in a similar shape, kind of straight across the top. So these are two different colors. I did a little running stitch on there. I did a little blanket stitch around the edge of the wing. Not very well, but there you go. It gave some decoration. And then I just cut a few pieces of little scraps that I had sitting around. I decided to go with kind of greens here. And then I did use the same as the flower or the bird here. So anyway, that was just a super quick, fun little thing. I might mount it on a canvas or I might put another piece of fabric under it and then make a pillow out of it. Not totally sure yet. But again, scraps, okay? Little pieces of fabric can become a fun little collage, a little fabric painting. And I love doing those. They're just, and I don't plan anything else. I didn't draw anything. I freehand cut the bird. I freehand cut the little triangles. You know, you could do whatever you want. If you want to trace this from a cutout online, you could totally do that. But it doesn't need to be perfect to be really fun. So that is another idea. Okay, third idea, and this is the one that I'm going to do an example of, is this. Now, I talked a little while ago about making little bundles that you have available that you could use on other projects. And generally, I'm thinking like a doily, a piece of fabric, and a button. Just something really small that you could add as an embellishment to different projects. But you can also make something larger. This could go on a handbag. This could go on a pillow. And the fact that it's done means I could quickly cut this out and then stick it on something. Okay, I am planning to cut this out, so I'm not worried about the fact that this is puckering up a little bit. So with these flowers, and what I want to show you is I did something different. I hadn't seen it before. I'm sure a million people have done it, but I wanted to, instead of stitching down circles of fabric that were all flat like I did here, I thought, well, what would happen if instead of it all being flat, if the bottom layer was gathered in some way? So that's what I did with these. So they're still scrappy flowers, but they are gathered. And I go round and round. I think I like it best this way. I kind of like this lighter color background in that position. But anyway, you could obviously do whatever you want. So what I did was layers, 2 of them are gathered, and then this is just a flat little thing that I stitched down on top. Okay, this one is actually a Suffolk puff and then a gathered layer. And this one is 3 gathered layers, or actually no, it's 1 gathered layer. And then these are circles, but they just kind of frilled around it. And then I went ahead and stitched down some leaves to give it a bit of a grounding. So this is the one I thought I would walk you through. Okay, so when it comes to making the background for these, I just want to pull some fabric in a similar color pattern. And if you've seen my studio tour that I did a couple videos ago, you know that I have all my fabrics sorted by color. So I just pulled my pink bin, okay? It has all kinds of different sizes. It has all kinds of different patterns. And I like this because it's still gonna be it's gonna go together, but it won't necessarily match in any way. So I'm just gonna pull a couple more fabrics from that and then put this aside. So when it comes to cutting these circles, what I realized while I was doing this is I didn't need them to be exact circles like if I was making a Suffolk puff. It actually seemed to work better if the circle itself was a little more organic. So I'm gonna cut a circle generally. You can do that by you keep cutting and then you just turn your fabric. But then as I'm going, I'm actually going to kind of come in and out, make it a little bit scalloped on the edge. I found that this made it just sit a little more interesting on the piece. So over here, I think I'll just kind of make that little bit of wavy. It doesn't have to all be wavy, but just a couple places, I'll make it kind of interesting. Okay, so now I have a generally circular shape here. So now what I'm going to do, I'm not going to gather it around the edge like if I were doing a Suffolk puff. I wanted to see what would happen if I just gathered randomly some part of the middle. So to make gathers in the middle, I'm just going to take my thread and go like a running stitch, not really worrying about pulling it tight at this point. And I'm going to stitch in a basic circle, kind of in the middle, not huge. Like wouldn't want it to be all the way around, although you could certainly experiment with what happens when it's different sizes. But I'm just kind of turning as I poke my needle in and out. And I want to basically make almost like a little hat. The center part will be a little puffed up, and that's okay. That's gonna work just fine. All right, so again, I'm gonna go around, and as you can see, it's offset. That's fine. It doesn't matter where in the circle this is, but I do want it to end just about where I started. Okay, so once I've pulled that through my little running stitch, then I'm gonna put my finger there so that it poofs out that direction. And then I'm just gonna gently pull to gather this piece. Okay, now we can pull it really tight first because we can always, you know, spread it out later. So now if I needed it to be a little hat or something, I could do that. But what I wanna do is then kind of pull these out a little bit like that. And I'm gonna end up stitching down the middle. Okay, so I think I want a little bit more gathering on the front side. Let's see, on this side. If you need to take another stitch to get some more gathers where you want them, you can do that. Okay, because I want some more up on the top part. There you go. So this is what I was intending to make. It's a little shape. It has some frilled edges here, and that's going to be the basis of my flower. All right. Now the next step is, well, one thing is I want to decide whether I want that to be the base or if I needed a bigger one. I think I'm going to go with this as the base. Okay, so now I'm just going to cut a few more circles. On my other piece, I did all pinks, but I thought it might be kind of fun to bring in yellow as one of the layers on here. And I have this piece of fabric. When I'm cutting something like this, I'm gonna find the scrappiest part. I'm not gonna cut more scraps out of this that's nice, and in case I ever need it to be that shape. So I'm just gonna come down here to where it's already been cut. And again, I'm just gonna freehand cut it out of here. And I just need to make sure it's a little bit smaller than that. So again, I'm gonna leave that over there and then just sort of eyeball it. Now this one is not going to get gathered. So I'm actually just gonna cut a little piece, and that way I can work with it a little more easily than, you know, and you could cut a square or something off of it and then cut around it, and that's fine. I just think, you know, I'm just gonna cut a scrap off and then do this. Now, obviously, if you already have scraps from another project, that's ideal for this. So lots of ways to do this. Okay, that will fit about right. So that's a good size for that layer. I think I like this for the next layer. I may actually have that one on the top. Okay, how about this one? That's cute. So I'm gonna cut a little bit smaller circle here. And again, I'm making them a little bit wavy. It could be perfectly circular, and that's fine too. Yep. So I just want to make sure that a little bit of this layer underneath shows. It doesn't have to be a ton. It totally can be up to you. And then as my final layer, I think I'm just going to cut out one of these flowers so that I can see that. And it's going to get stitched over, but it will still be evident. The other option is you could put a button as your final thing. That would totally work too. Or you could even make a tiny Suffolk puff. You could put a little dangle there, whatever. Okay, now I have my little layers of flour. So all I'm going to do is position this over the center that's gathered up there, okay? Now, I'm going to go ahead, I had left this thread there. I'm just going to come up straight through the middle of the flower. And work that through. And then I want to make sure I don't pull too tight because I still want that bottom layer to be gathered. And then take a little stitch. Now you could do a contrasting color, and that's actually what I did on some of them. Or you could do white, you could do whatever. If you didn't want your stitches to show, you could do kind of an invisible basting stitch, but I think having the stitches show is part of the fun of this project. Okay. Now I'm just doing a couple of these to get this as a unit, and then I'm actually going to stitch it to another piece of fabric. And I'm going to think about whether I want it to be a different color. Okay, so once I've gotten just a few stitches in, I'm going to go ahead and knot this off on the back just to keep my this part of my flower together. So here is my little flower. Isn't she so cute? So there's a few things we could do here. Maybe I want to lay out a few flowers like I did in this design. Again, sets of 3 are very visually pleasing. Your brain wants there to be an odd number. A set of 5 would also work, or just one in the middle. All of those options would work. If you want to do 2, like I did in the first design, you might want to put another interesting part of your design. Even if it's not a flower, it could be the leaves or something like that. Another fun thing would be to do a snail down here or a butterfly right here. There's different, if you have different elements, then if you think about those in terms of odd numbers, I think that generally works really well in your design. So with this one, you know, the question is, am I going to want 1? You know, or I can break all the rules and put 1 little guy and then do a little flower pot. Oh my goodness, that would be really cute. Okay, maybe I'll do that because I kind of love that idea. I'm going to center it so I have enough space around it. I could be working on a giant piece, that would be fine. But as I said, I'm using scraps here. I grabbed a little piece of fleece. Now, here's the thing with the fleece. It doesn't need to be the size of the whole back. It just really needs to be under whatever you're stitching. So I'm going to put it on the back opposite my flower. And the thing is too, that I'm not going to be stitching down the edges because I want it to have a dimensional look, okay? So instead, I'm just gonna position my flower here, and then I'm gonna position my fleece behind it. I could pin this in place, but I'm about to secure it, so I'm not too worried about that. Oh my goodness, you guys. So I was at a yard sale or an estate sale last week, and it is always amazing when you come across somebody who was a quilter or an embroiderer. I got a ton of embroidery floss for not very much money. But then I like them to be on bobbins. So I spent some time putting them in bobbins, and then of course I color coded them because that's how my brain works. So I have some various colors of embroidery floss, and I'm thinking, what color do I want to stitch this middle down with? I could go with a pink, might do that, but I'm kind of thinking I might like a yellow. I'm gonna do yellow. If I can put a little contrast into something, I know that I'm gonna enjoy that later. Okay, so let's find a good yellow. I don't want it to be too bold. Maybe like, that kind of brings out that cute yellow in there. Let's go with that one. I'm going to go ahead and bring this right up through here. I'm going to go ahead and pull my thread right up through the middle. And again, I'm going to center this on the back. Sorry for the noise outside. Our neighbor is doing the lawnmower. Hopefully it's not too loud for you. Now, it is a little tricky to get this through the fleece and all of the layers of fabric. All right, so I've got my one stitch through, and now I'm going to go ahead and stitch around this flower. Now I've decided not to slow stitch over the whole thing like I did with my flat flowers. In this project, I started off doing more slow stitching over it, and I didn't totally love how the whole thing fell. So here I did just a few stitches, and I think that actually looks better because of the amount of dimension. You know, in this design, the flat stitches are part of the design. A friend of mine was looking at this project, and she said that she loves how when you look at it, you keep looking and there's more and more to see. So I do love that about this one, but it doesn't serve us quite as well with this project. So I'm taking my contrasting thread, and I'm really just going to go around the kind of the edge of this first layer here. So we have jumped right in with this project, explaining, talking so many things, but I have not yet asked you how you are doing. I hope that you're working on something fun. And of course, you're more than welcome to stitch along with this. You can pause, cut out some circles, and then we can stitch it down together. So just a running stitch. You could get fancy and have some other kind of stitch, but I do think that the running stitch probably will serve you really well with this particular project. You don't want to have something really heavy necessarily on this design. You know, at least that's my 2 cents. You are welcome to do as you please. Now, because it's not as heavily gathered down here, it's a lot easier to go through the layers. And as you can see, like when I pull on this, it does tighten up some of the layers underneath, which is part of what gives us a lot of dimension. You could definitely frill more than one layer, and probably, you know, maybe 2 of them, and maybe offset the gathers. So like gather it more on one side and then the next layer gather more on the other. That would be fun to play with. So this morning I had an early meeting with my girls that I kind of mentor and work with, and that was really great. And then I had looked on Facebook Marketplace, of course, and a lady was selling an old wooden step stool. Well, it turned out that she owns a wedding venue, and I've been there many times, and I totally know her, so small world. So I went over to her place to pick up this fabulous little step stool that I'm going to use to display stuff in my booth, because everything is about my booth right now. That's just the way life is right now. So I went over there. Well, her husband went and got the step stool for me, and he said, I also found this huge wooden ladder, not like huge this way, but tall. And he said, I found it under this house that was built in 1937. And I was under the house and I found this and a few old tools left from some old DIY project of the ages. He's like, and I mostly just want this out of my barn. Well, I was more than happy to take it off his hands at a very reasonable price. And I have been wanting a ladder that I could maybe display some linens on. And this one is perfect because it's not, the rungs are like this big around and they're only about this wide. So it's perfect for displaying maybe a folded tablecloth or a hand towel. And the thing is like 9 feet tall. I may end up cutting it in 2 and having one like taller ladder and then a short little ladder that I could put on a tabletop. Haven't really thought about it yet. But anyway, all of that happened this morning before 8 o'clock. I got home. My son said, I said, I've had a very productive morning. And he said, what have you been doing? And I said, well, Facebook Marketplace. He's like, it's 8:30. But hey, you know, strike while the iron is hot. Early bird catches the worm. My dad used to just repeat off a whole bunch of Benjamin Franklin quotes, one after another. Stitch in time saves 9. Penny saved is a penny earned. He was being silly. But anyway, they're good quotes. But this morning, I really did have a lot of fun early in the morning and got a bunch of stuff done, which was great. I had to be back by 8 because we were having some furniture delivered. And oh my goodness, am I excited with it. I think I mentioned a few videos ago that I sold a bunch of our furniture on Facebook Marketplace before I had really replaced it. It's partly because I just needed to see the room before I knew what we wanted to have. And so I sold our couch and a large chair, pretty much most of the furniture. I did buy one sofa off of a friend, again through Facebook Marketplace, and it's so pretty and I love it. So I have that. But yeah, we didn't have much other living room furniture, at least not that went together. I had some, you know, furniture brought in from other rooms because I have been entertaining with my random supply of seating. All right, friends. So this is the flower at this point. So again, I've got some little ruffles. Now, I'm going to tell you at this point, you know, so all of my stitching for the most part is on that fleece, okay? I'm actually going to trim around the fleece, and I don't know, for whatever reason, I just found that it seemed to sit better if there wasn't a bunch of fleece sticking off. Okay, so just the stitched part is going to have fleece on the back, okay? And the rest is just like that. Now, as you can see, it is a little puckered, but and two fixes for that. I could just line the whole thing with fleece or just a different kind of fabric. You could 100% do that. The other thing is I can cut this out and use it in another project, okay? So this makes it all one piece now, and if I wanted to, I could do that. But the other thing is that fabric is very flexible. And if I wanted to stretch this over like a little canvas or put it in a frame, or even, let me show you one other thing. Okay, I have these wooden thread bobbins from who knows where or when, long time ago, okay? One option is I could fold this so that it's a little bit smaller, or I could make a channel and run a ribbon through it and then hang it, you know, but stretch this that way. That's another option. Anyway, so many possibilities. So there's definitely different things we could do. But I think I still really love my flower pot idea. And so I'm going to worry about the stretching of the fabric later. I am, though, going to have something under the flower pot, just like I did for the other part. So for your viewing pleasure, and also because I'm curious about this, I'm actually just going to use another piece of fabric under this part of the project and see which one works better. Okay, so I've just taken a little piece of cotton that I had sitting around. I'm going to put that under what will become my flower pot. So what kind of fabric should we use for the flower pot? Could just do white. Look how cute that little top is. Yeah, that's fun. Could do white and embroider something on it. Could do white and put some kind of, let's see, what kind of vintage embroideries do I have hanging about? I mean, always so many, right? I could, but I don't want anything that's going to fight with this. Oh my word, would that not be the cutest background for another flower? I'm setting these to the side because it would, 100%. Look, I've got 3 of them and then a big one. Okay, this is totally becoming a garden of flowers. I'm setting those over there. I think actually what I do want to do though for this project is another little fabric in the same kind of colors. So I have this. That is bold. Love it, but maybe not for this one. How about this one? I kind of like that. Go with this. It's not quite the right pink. This fits, so let's do that. Okay, it looks like I've just got a couple of squares of this one. So that works. Then the question is, which part of it do I want to have? And what shape? Okay, so I'm thinking flower pot, just kind of a little trapezoid. And I think I may put a contrasting color at the top, or maybe use some crochet or something like that at that point. Okay, so let me just come in here. I wanted to have some design on it. Let's use this part. I have a small enough piece to work with. Let's see. I think I'm just gonna give it, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna fold my fabric in half. That way it'll be even on both sides. You know me, it doesn't have to be perfect, but I do kind of want it to have the right shape. So I'm just gonna cut here, and then I'm gonna cut a fairly straight line up to about there. Then I'm gonna snip edge here. Not sure if these are good scissors or not. I did get them in the estate sale. They seem to be okay. Okay. I kind of love that. Now the question is, do I mind that it's wider than the flower? I don't think I do. I think it's cute. Okay, so now I want to see if this is wide enough. It's about right. I flip it around so it's wider at the top. Okay, I think that's going to work just fine. I'm gonna snip off some of the extra there. And if I needed to patch this on the back, I totally could do that. For this, I used yellow. I think I'd like to do that again. So all I'm going to do is come in here and finish off my thread so that it's secure. Then I will come down here and I will attach my little flower pot. So, just going to come up through both of my layers to start off my stitching. And we'll see if it's enough fabric to not pucker, but I think it's gonna be all right. We'll see. I'm just gonna have to be careful not to pull my thread too tight, and that's true. Now, some of you might be wondering, why is she not using an embroidery hoop? And that is a fair question, but I've just gotten used to holding the fabric and not using one, no matter what kind of embroidery I'm doing, so I don't use one. If this project would work for you better, you could certainly put, stitch on a larger piece of fabric and put it in an embroidery hoop. That'll keep it nice and tight for you. But I don't know, tip for me, this just works better. Okay, again, just a little simple running stitch. I'm gonna go straight across here. And then I'm gonna pull it so that it's not gathered. I'm going to go back to the back at the edge here. Then I think I'm going to go ahead and do a stitch all around the outside. Another option would be to go ahead and stitch this with that kind of cantha style running stitch that goes back and forth across. You could definitely do it that way. It'd be kind of fun. But I think I'm just going to do the edge. And again, if you have other favorite applique styles, you could do, you could blanket stitch this. You could do another kind of fancy stitch. That might be fun. Or like a whip stitch around the edges, you could do that. But I decided to just do sort of an outline about 1/4 of an inch away from the edge. If this were a cool frayed fabric, I would love that, but it is not really fraying, and that's okay. It'll still look really good. I'm actually going to turn my fabric. I always find it's easier to just go from right to left like this. Here we go. So anyway, to continue my story from earlier, we did get new furniture. I got a couple of great chairs and then a big comfy chair for the corner, and oh my goodness, does it look great. I'm very happy with it. So now everyone has a place to sit. It all goes together. Pretty fun. Okay, Yeah, that worked pretty well. Looks like I missed over there. We'll see if it makes any difference. So this will be a good example of whether it makes a difference because not all of it's stitched through another sheet of fabric. Okay. I think that actually worked just fine. So now I'm going to create a stem. There are obviously a few ways we could do this. We could have a chain stitch stem in embroidery floss, which is what I did on this project, and I really like that. That's fun. I could cut out a very small strip of fabric and then stitch it down. That I might do because that would be kind of fun. I'm definitely going to applique some leaves on, so possibility. Or my third option is I could use something like this. Why do I have so much yarn when I don't really crochet or knit? That is a fantastic question. But it's partly because I consider myself a textile artist, and they are certainly textiles. So wouldn't this look cute? To have just a little snippet of this. Yep, I'm kind of loving that. Now, it is a wide, sort of variegated. I think for the sake of simplicity, and it's because it's just such a small amount, I might go ahead and just choose one color because I don't need it to be that long. Then the question is, do I want it to just go straight up and down like a fun little planted flower? Or do I want it to curve around? I think we're going just planted. Now, the last question is, I'm going to hide it in some way under the flower pot. I should have laid this down first, but it's not the end of the world. I could make it work. For one thing, I've got the option of covering this, and I think that's going to be what I end up doing. Okay, so then the question is, do I want it to go like that? I love that it goes to an ombre there because it looks almost like there's a shadow being cast by the flower. I'm going to cut this long enough so that it goes up underneath here, but I don't want it to be too long so it doesn't bunch up underneath. So let's go with, we can always cut more, right? Measure twice, cut once, isn't that what they say? And in this case, we're measuring by laying it out. Snipping it off. Yep, that works. That is a cute little flower stem. All right, so now that we've laid that down, what we're going to do is something called couching. And I am sure a lot of you are familiar with it, but in case you're not, couching is where you take stitches and you go over something or stitch it on in some way so that it's just laying on the top. For this, I am going to come in with some embroidery floss over the top. So let's see what might be the best color. It doesn't have to match, but I'm just looking through my different greens. These are too yellow. Green, really what I want is kind of a silvery. See, that goes nicely with that color, but it's too light for the rest of the project. I think that one's pretty good. All right. And now they're going to be pretty small stitches, so I guess it doesn't matter, but you know, I want to try and get something that goes. I'm just going to come up right under this. To see what this yarn is like. Oh, okay. Didn't see this. Look, it has all these layers to it. That's cool. Well, we're not going to layer it up for the sake of this. I'm just going to stick it all over the top. I'm not going to let it do any of its other fun things. I just want it to be kind of one stem for this. Okay. That first stitch, it's not going to show because it's going to be under there. So it's a good practice. There are other ways to couch things, and please look up a tutorial if you want to learn about couching, because this really, what I'm ending up doing may or may not even really be that. I'm more just getting this yarn on the surface, and in that sense it is couching on, but there might be other stitches you could use. If you're new here, I've only started embroidering about a year ago, and everything else that I've learned has just been part of that process. I am by no means an expert, but I do love working with fabric, and I do it a lot, so I've learned a ton in the last year, and that has been really, really cool. Now, one of the things I'm working on as I go through here is not puckering up the fabric. So as I go back and forth, I am really making sure that I don't pull too hard and make it pucker around. So this was my idea. I want to see this little stitch going back and forth, and there are ways to couch on things where you don't really see it, but because this yarn is almost like a gathered set of threads, I'm gonna do something that definitely secures it in place. So this is working for this. If you have just, you know, a regular piece of yarn or something like that that you want to use, then you probably have some other options. Or you could even do this down the back of a piece of yarn, from the back, come up through it, and do it basically invisibly. So that would be another way to do it. But for this, I'm going to have these little stitches over the top, and I think they're kind of cute. Now, as I said, I'm going to cover up the bottom part here, but I'm going to go ahead and secure it down, maybe even more than these other ones, just so that it doesn't stick up. And I could cut it off right there, but because it's so fringy, I think that might not be the look I was going for. Another option would be to simply stitch really close together over this and only have the color that I chose for the stitches. That would be another way to do this. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. Yeah, that looks kind of cool, and it's sort of an ombre effect coming down because of the color underneath. All right, so one more stitch, and then I'm going to go back through and knot it off. Note that I'm not doing my knot super tightly. I don't want it to pucker the fabric again. But it's tight enough to be secure. All right. So there is my little flower with the flower pot. Now, what we need is a rim. And I don't think I want to do a contrasting fabric. And I do have some pink yarn like this, but having just worked with it, that's a no. I didn't find that super friendly. Instead, I think that what would be really pretty here would be something with maybe a crocheted edge. So I've pulled my crocheted edge hanky bin. I'm going to see if I have anything narrow enough to work. All of these are really beautiful, but they're way too wide. Ooh, how about this? That's sweet. This is an old hanky or napkin. It's quite stained, but obviously for this, it would be great. Okay, let's try this. Look at that. I believe that is hand tatted lace. That is so beautiful. I almost like the part that's stained. It goes with my background fabric, and it's kind of cool. Okay, now, if I had a corner on one end, it might look kind of funny to not have a corner on the other end. So I think I may just snip it away from the edge. I could come in right here, and that way I can use this in another project. All right, I think I'm going to do that. I'm just going to give myself a little bit of space. Then I'm going to hold this here, and I really want to cut it pretty exact. That is why I'm holding this at such an awkward angle. Otherwise, I would want to, you know, hold it at an easier angle. And then I'm really just going to snip off this lace. I'm obviously cutting far enough away so that I don't cut it off here. I don't want to separate it from that, but I'm going to come back in and trim as close as I can get to that little line that's holding it to this background fabric. Okay. Look how cute that is. I love that. Oh my goodness, that is just adorable. So let's go with this. I'm going to need some neutral colored thread. So white might stand out too much. I have a neutrals bag, and let's see. Yeah, I think that's going to work better. So let's bring in, I'm going to start off, let's see, just underneath. And I like how the pink is showing through on that. I think that's really cute. Just going to secure the end. The thing about working with lace and stitching it on is obviously you don't want to, you want to make sure that you get the heavier parts of the fabric or of the lace. You don't want it to be, you know, where it's open or something like that. So I want to make tiny stitches through parts of the lace that'll also blend in. And I'm going to pull it pretty gently so that I don't get, what's our word of the day? I don't get puckering. Okay, holding it like this enables me to really keep a good eye on it too. Another reason to work free of an embroidery hoop for this. Now you can see I'm just going throughout the zigzag of the lace to connect it kind of up and down in several places. Oh, that's looking really cute. Then over on this side, I want to make sure that I do get along the edge. I'm going to go ahead and do a couple of extra stitches there so that it doesn't fray. Just going to kind of check and see if there's anything else that I really want tacked down. There's a couple ways to do that. One is to just kind of run your finger along it and see. It's pretty secure. The bottom isn't, but I don't really mind that. If it sticks out, it gives me a little shadow, provides a little dimension. So I'm just going to take another little stitch, and before I pull it tight or knot it, I'm going to go ahead and lay it flat, spread it out, see if any stitches need to be pulled down. No, that looks pretty good. And then I'll go ahead and put a knot on the back, finish her off. There she is. We've got the flower in the flower pot with our little stem. That is really cute. The only thing I feel like it's missing is leaves. Now there's a couple of ways we could do this. I could just stitch on a couple of embroidered leaves. I could applique a couple of leaves out of some green fabric. I definitely have some cool green fabric around because I was just working on these other leaves. Let's see what I've got handy. Now I do have an entire bin of green fabric, but I don't think we need to pull that out. This just caught my eye. This is some strips of fabric I got. And that'd be kind of a pretty shade, that little green with the checks on it. That may decide it for me. I'm just gonna cut off enough so that I can work with it. Now, I am not a quilter. If I were, I would probably leave these remaining as strips. Oh, I also have these little, really cute, I have these little mini charm pack. Let's look in here and see if any of these would just be the perfect thing. You can kind of look from the side. Oh, look at all those fun colors. Now these are perfect for this kind of project. If you can pick one up for really, you know, get a deal on it. But this does not have any green, so that's not going to work for this. Put all these fabrics back. And if you watched my studio tour, these are some that are clipped to the side from a curtain rod, and that makes it really handy. All right, now clearly I just want a couple of little leaves. I don't want them to be too big. So let's just look. Now, you could definitely get a leaf template, but really with a leaf, you just want to make a curved line one way, and then a curved line back the other way. And leaves don't have to be perfect. That's about the right size, I think. And well, 3 of most things, 1, 3, 5 of most things is what you want to do. When it comes to leaves, I don't know why, but I feel like there's often 2 leaves. Now I did put 3 leaves in some of my projects because I like them. Let's see. Let me show you. So let's look at the different options. I did 3 leaves here. I did 1 leaf here. I did 3 leaves here. I did 3 there. I did 1 and 1 at the base. All right, with this project, I did 3 sets of 2. And I think that filled it in really nicely. I think like a third would work, but it might be overkill. So the 3 is in the flowers, and then we have 3 sets of 2, and I think that works. But for this one, there's something really simple about a flower with a leaf at the base and 1 partway up the stem. Doesn't that just look right? Why does it look right? I don't know. I'm not totally sure, but it does. So we're gonna go with that. Now I'm going to bring in the same green that I did for the stem. Obviously you could use a totally contrasting color. You could do whatever you want here, but I think that'll keep it simpler. I'm gonna put that run pretty much at the base. I want to see the whole shape of the leaf, so I'm not going to put it too far into the little lace, but I'm pretty much putting it at the base. And with these, I'm just going to do a running stitch up the center of the leaf. I could certainly go around the edge like I did here, but with my leaves, I want to keep it more like the petal, able to kind of furl up like the petals do. So that is a quick stitch, just a few stitches up the front. Now I could run this across the back, could definitely do that over to my other leaf, but I don't want it to pull the fabric, so I'm just going to end that there and then start again where my other leaf goes. So I'll place my other little leaf partway up the stem. Oh my goodness, that looks so cheerful. And I'm going to go in from the back. Just make sure it's attached before, because I can always move it over a little bit. There we go. There we go. Just making sure it's close enough. And then I'm gonna continue right up the center. Now you can see this absolutely could use the tiniest little scrap of fabric. I do tend to save a lot of my fabrics. Sometimes I just keep them in a bag and it's all kinds of different colors. When I first started, I had jars with I'd put all of the little pieces from each color in a jar. I still have those sorted, but I don't always separate them out now. I figure I can just pull them from a wad of fabric. So, whatever works for you. Oh, so cute. Okay, that's about the right number of stitches. I'm just going to come on the back and tie that off. There we go. How cute is that little garden? All right, now that's all I'm going to do on this at this point, but let me get you some other ideas. This would make such a cute gardening journal, wouldn't it? So if you were doing that, you could just stitch this to a garden journal cover that you stitch up. There's lots of different patterns available online. Any size book pretty much would fit this one. I think a standard size notebook, if this would work just fine. So that's an idea. And I love the frayed edge on this, so I would probably just sew it down. I also might put some words that I print on fabric, maybe in the garden or garden journal. You could put something like that, print it on fabric. You could stitch some little ladybugs or bees, or could do a butterfly if you wanted a little bit of extra interest around it. I do kind of like white space, so that works. You could also take this and make it into a pillow. Okay, so just imagine you have some fabric, probably bigger than this, and we just lay that there, cut around this, stitch that together, boom, you've got a really cute little pillow. You could even do in this fabric a little butterfly right there to bring that in. Might even do that because that would be adorable. All right, my friends, I hope that this has given you lots of ideas of things that you can do with your piles of scraps, and that it brought you some inspiration, or at the very least that you've enjoyed hanging out and stitching together. So I hope you have a creative day, and I will see you soon. Bye-bye.